Hi, this is Tom Needham, and you're listening to the Sounds of Film. And joining us on the program today is Rick Minnich. He's an American independent filmmaker based in Berlin, Germany. You probably know Rick for his award winning films, including Heaven on Earth, Homemade Hillbilly Jam, Forgetting Dad, and a bunch of others. Today we're going to be speaking about his latest film, The President's Tailor, which is about Martin Greenfield, who learned to sew in Auschwitz and went on to make suits for U.S. presidents and stars. He made a great documentary about Martin, and really excited to speak to Rick about this movie. Rick, thanks so much for joining us on the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Yeah, so this is a fascinating story. What initially drew you to Martin Greenfield's story, and how did it resonate with your personal experiences?
Well, this was kind of an unusual case for me. Normally, I come up with my own ideas and then go looking for money to make them. But in this case, the idea kind of landed in my lap through a German colleague. He was doing some research at the Buchenwald Memorial in Germany. That's the second concentration camp where Martin Greenfield was as a teenager. And the historian there mentioned that there was this guy, Maxmilian Grünfeld, who was a teenager here at the camp, and he went to the United States after the war and became a famous tailor. Maybe you should make a story about him. So my colleague Hugo said, "Hey, Rick, you're an American. Why don't you find this guy?" So I did a little research and tracked down Greenfield Clothiers in Brooklyn, the company, and just called them up. And a couple months later, we took our first trip over to New York. That was in 2017, and that's where the whole story started.
Are you normally a big fan of historical documentaries?
No, not particularly. I tend to be more interested in stories about people in the present, but how their lives are largely impacted by major events in the past. So this fit in well in that vein, with this Holocaust background that Martin went through. But I didn't want to look for a bunch of archival footage and set the story in the past. I was much more interested in what was going on in the daily life with the Greenfield family and at Greenfield Clothiers.
For those listeners who are maybe not that familiar with his accomplishments in the tailoring field, can you explain? Because he's really a giant, and I'm not sure that everyone knows that.
Yeah, Martin he started at Greenfield Clothiers. It was called 3Gs back then. So in the late 1940s as a floor boy. So really started at the bottom of the ladder and quickly worked his way up. His boss saw that he was very meticulous and was always looking to make the manufacturing process more efficient. So before long, he became the shop supervisor. And Mr. Goldman, his one boss, really took him under his wings and took him to Hollywood with him once and introduced him to all these Hollywood stars and really taught him the whole business and how it got him into the whole social circles with celebrities. And then the whole presidential thing started when Dwight D. Eisenhower was president at Columbia University. So in the years before he became president of the United States, he ordered some suits, and Martin wanted to. He decided that Ike should wear three-piece suits. So he made Eisenhower a three-piece suit, and Ike loved it. And then that became his trademark. He always wore three-piece suits from that point on. And the legend is that Martin, this was during the Suez Canal crisis, that he um, put little notes in the pockets of the suits that went out to Eisenhower, giving him advice on how to resolve the Suez Canal crisis. This was later when he was the U.S. president.
How big a deal is it when you're working in this line of work to be able to say, I made a suit for the president?
I'd say it's a pretty big deal. Um, Actually, I was at Greenfield Clothers yesterday, and I was talking to Todd Greenfield, one of the two sons. Todd and Jay are the Martin's two sons who run the company now, and he was kind of telling the whole story about Obama's suits because they make suits for Obama. And there's a picture hanging on the wall of Martin, Todd, and Jay with President Obama at the White House when they were doing a fitting for him. And there's a lot of press speculation about who makes the suits that the president's wearing. And he was just telling me a little bit of background information about this discussion that some people claimed that it was a different manufacturer, but they know that these were Greenfield suits. And
Wow.
actually, I was there at the factory once, and they had Obama had ordered some new pants, and I saw the pants lying all boxed up, ready to be shipped out with his name on them and stuff. And so they're definitely the supplier.
I'm not an expert on fashion, but I go to film festivals sometimes, and every once in a while they'll do a Q&A with someone who is a costume designer or someone who's involved in the fashion industry, and I'm always kind of struck by the level of stars who will come out in support of a certain designer, and how like in awe they are of them. Like it was kind of it was something that I had to learn. I didn't really realize that he has a lot of admirers in Hollywood. You kind of concentrate on the presidents in this film, but can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned about his relationship with Hollywood?
Yes, that really began back in the 50s when he took these first trips to Hollywood with Mr. Goldman, and it just continued on. And they do a lot of movies and television series that has become in the last 10 years a larger part of their business. A major reason is that they have a vast amount of knowledge, of historical knowledge of how to make costumes like 19th century period pieces. They have all the patterns. They've done their research. They know how to actually manufacture those costumes, which can be quite complex. And there are not very many tailors who can do all that, can cover such a broad range. So once we were there, this is a scene that is not in the film, but we may release at some point. There's a fitting for the character who plays the Penguin in Gotham,
Oh wow.
and the two costume designers came there too, and we filmed with them. They showed us their sketches and kind of explained the process of what stage they were at when they came to Greenfield Clothiers, and what they wanted, and how they worked together with the tailors there to design the costume, or to manufacture, create the costume that they envisioned. And then the actor was trying on the costume, and it was quite fascinating to observe.
I mentioned it in the intro, but you go into this in much more detail in the film. Can you tell our listeners a little bit, without giving it all away, because I do want people to see the movie, um, about his origin story, about learning his craft at Auschwitz?
Yeah, so he was Martin came from a village called Pavlova, which back then was in Czechoslovakia in the Carpathian Mountains. Now it belongs to Western Ukraine. And it was on Passover in 1944 that his family was deported to Auschwitz. And he was assigned to work in the laundry room, and he tore the collar of a shirt from a Gestapo, and he was kind of like got into big trouble for it. And the story is that the Gestapo guy like just threw the torn shirt at Martin, was furious, and Martin kept the shirt and asked a tailor who was a fellow prisoner who was a tailor to show him how to repair the collar. And then Martin wore the shirt underneath his prisoner shirt, and that helped keep him warm. And he says that's what helped him survive the death march later on, when they left Auschwitz.
Wow.
So it was his first steps as a 15-year-old in learning how to sew.
One of the things that struck me is how brave that action was. And then you show him in America, and he's known for just being this very peaceful, friendly, smiling kind of guy. Um, can you tell us a little bit about his character? and what you learned about him, all the different facets of who he is.
Well, I came to know Martin very late in his life. He was 88 years old at that point. He died this past March at age 95. So he'd slowed down a bit. He was still a very charismatic and a very smiley person, very enjoyable to be around. Um, he had, I think, when you go through this huge traumatic event like surviving a concentration camp, I think you basically can be kind of cynical the rest of your life and dwell in the horrors, the horrible things that happen to you, or you could take the opposite approach and embrace all the good in the world and the fact that you survived. And that's the route that Martin took. So when he immigrated to the US, he was always looking for new opportunities. He met people, he had some good luck in meeting sort of the right people at the right time who recognized his talent and his charisma and optimism and helped him along at various stages. But he was definitely an incredibly hardworking man, and he was determined to learn all 108 steps to making a suit. And I think that process that he really started from the very bottom and mastered every single step, it made him a great tailor in the end. And also he maintained very good relationships to his employees because he really understood the the process that each employee, the step that they were doing in manufacturing a suit, and he could relate to the challenges they faced, and he was always very respectful towards his employees. So he was just, I would say his smile was, anyone who ever met him was really, he had this infectious smile, and he just had a kind of human spirit that couldn't be defeated.
That's great. You make a major effort in this film to also focus on his family, as you mentioned earlier. Why was that important?
Well, I saw when I was researching for the film, I was looking around online and I saw a lot of short news reports about Martin and Greenfield Clothers, and it was always reduced to this. I'm talking, anywhere between a minute and a half and 5 minutes or so. And always focused on his Holocaust survivor who makes suits for American presidents. And sometimes his sons would be in these pieces a little bit just because they'd be shooting stuff at the factory. But for instance, they never showed Martin's wife Arlene, and didn't didn't really get outside of the factory setting and archival footage. So I was just kind of curious how about this family run company, because he's now, at that point it was Martin and his two sons Jay and Todd running the company. Now Martin's grandson David has also joined the company, so it's the third generation of Greenfields. And I was really interested in this whole family run business, and also the fact that the company itself, the factory has been going for 100 years, and it's a very, anyone who's ever gone there in East Williamsburg, it's quite an old fashioned looking place, and it seems kind of like a business on the surface to me that seemed very outdated. And I was wondering, well, how can they survive, and how do they do this? But the fact that they are kind of old fashioned and stick to their credo of creating quality with intrinsic value, that's been their saving grace. So instead of like having retail shops and all this kind of overhead that could have run them out of business during the pandemic, for instance, they have stuck to producing quality. And if someone wants a Greenfield suit, you have to go to their factory and go get fitted and go through this whole process. And that really fascinated me. And then there were family events that came up where they invited us to be a part of it. One was a Seder during Passover at Todd's house on Long Island, and then there was the extended family there, and it became a whole bigger story to me because I wanted to see how Martin's story was presented and perceived within a larger family context. How do they celebrate Martin? Um, how do his other extended relatives, how do his grandchildren react around him? And that was very interesting to me. I also come from a large family myself and have lots of kids, and so big family environments are just kind of my world.
That's really fascinating because I think the trend right now throughout the world is the opposite. Families are getting smaller and smaller. More people are deciding not to have kids. At least that's the trend I've heard. Um, what is it about his family you think that has allowed them to continue on with this business so successfully? Because doing a family business is hard.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard business. I've been there at the factory a few times, and they were going through some kind of challenging situations. I've also been there during some quiet moments, but it's a complicated business. They produce such high quality suits that sometimes there are moments because of new legislation and stuff when it has become difficult for them to acquire certain kinds of buttons, for instance, to import them, and then they've had to find other ways to, you know, get get the raw materials to do their work. Um, so yeah, that the whole family dynamics. The one son Jay says at one point in the film that, they know the family history of their father, and they wanted him to be successful. So the two sons decided, they wanted to support him, their father, in any way they could. And so that's when they joined the business. And it was actually the Jay and Todd had studied, had gone to university and studied, and were sort of beginning other careers when their father asked them to join the business, back in the late 70s, early 80s. And he says in his autobiography that that's the best decision he ever made, bringing his sons into the business, because they grew it together.
Oh, wow. That's
And
really
now,
nice.
the grandson David, who worked on Wall Street for about 10 years, he's coming in with new experiences, new ideas about how to sort of modernize their online presence, new marketing ideas. And now, the Greenfield Clothiers is coming into a new phase of, I don't know, development or existence, or whatever you might want to call it.
What is the new phase?
Well, they're becoming more of, for instance, they have plans that they want to integrate the customers a little bit more into the production process by creating little videos for them along the way, so that the customers can see the various steps of their actual suit being manufactured. That's been one little goal of theirs. They've introduced a new club, the Martin Greenfield Club, where you can pay an annual membership fee, and you some perks like discounts on new suits. You get free alterations and things like that.
Hmm. So, can you tell me a little bit about the process of editing this film? One of the things you come to expect with a lot of documentaries these days, there's always conflict. There's always drama. They try to make documentaries, it seems like, mirror like the structure of Hollywood films. This film, though, did not have a lot of conflict. Um, and yet it was very entertaining. And I don't think that's easy to do. Um, can you tell me a little bit about the editing process and this issue of conflict or no conflict? Or was there some conflict that you decided to kind of cut out of the film? It wasn't necessary.
Well, it was not my. Um, that's an interesting question, because I'm an American, but I've lived in Germany since 1990. I went to film school in Germany, so I grew up in the American storytelling tradition, but have adopted European storytelling ways in many ways. And I think my films kind of reflect a little bit of, both systems. So I've made other films that have more conflict in them, but I'm definitely not. Um, my funders were not people who demanded high drama in the storytelling and things like that. So I had total free reign in how I wanted to tell the story. And I just told it in a way that felt natural to me and from the way we were observing it. And this also has to do with the style of the cameraman, Tom Bergman. He's a German cameraman who lives in Brooklyn, and we went to film school together. And he has a certain, verite style, an observational style. He has a very keen eye, and his material is really easy to edit because he everything's there. So, The dramatic moments, I think this would have been a very different film if I lived in New York and could go over there spontaneously when things were happening, and I could have shot a lot more, but that just wasn't the situation. It was always an effort to come over to the US several times for filming trips, and sometimes there was a lot going on and sometimes there wasn't as much going on. And sometimes I would talk to Jay, and he would tell me about, oh, I was just up at Henry Kissinger's place in Connecticut last week. He just ordered 4 new suits, and I was thinking, oh, I would love to film that, but it just wasn't, you know, it wasn't possible. So I couldn't be everywhere.
Yeah.
But the answer is really that it has to do with the just the technicalities of the production of being a German production and shooting a film in New York and being a fairly small production, a fairly low budget production, and my own storytelling style. But I'm really not so interested in making films that are told in sort of the latest. I'm not interested in following trends, which I think is something that also attracted me at Greenfield Clothiers. They have their own style.
Hmm.
They don't they're not in a rush to jump on the bandwagon about anything.
That's for sure, and you really show that in this film, and I think our listeners are going to enjoy this story if they get a chance to see it. I know there's a bunch of opportunities here in America to see this film, and even on Long Island. Can you tell our listeners about, if they want to learn more about this film, where can they go online to look, and tell us about some of the places where this film will be screening?
Sure. So the best place to look it up is just the presidentstailor.com. That's our website. There's information about where the film is playing. You can also join our mailing list there. The U.S. premiere is September 17th. That's tonight at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. I'll be there with the Greenfield family at 7 and 8:30. There are screenings. And then starting tomorrow on September 18th, we're starting a 1 week theatrical run at the IFC Center in Manhattan. And all the information is on the website about that. And then this Saturday at 8 p.m., we're having a screening at the Hampton Synagogue at Jack's house. And I'll be there with the Greenfield family as well. And then in the coming months, we've got various screenings coming up. We're going to have early next year a lot of stuff going on in Florida, for instance.
That's incredible, and that's a lot of different places nearby that our local listeners can go and see this film, which I highly recommend. Rick, it's really a fun film, a great story. What a unique story, inspiring, and you did a fantastic job. Thank you so much for talking to me about the President's Tailor. What a film, and I wish you best of luck with the screenings.
And thanks, Tom. And thanks for having me.
Of course. Bye bye.